All right, take it away, Jonah.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jonah Lubin, and today I'll be presenting to you guys on the optimal approach for infielders to take on stolen base attempts. And so I wanted to start off by explaining the background and importance. So imagine this. You are the shortstop on an MLB team. The runner on first base decides to steal second base. If you have a general knowledge of baseball, you know that either the shortstop or the second baseman has to cover second base in order to try to get the runner out. However, which position actually covers? And if it isn't you, what should you do? Now, although this does seem complex, this answer is known by every single middle infielder in the league. Although what they think is correct might not actually be correct. Baseball is a game of low scoring. Even the difference in the average runs per game between the best and worst offense in 2022 was only 1.73, which kind of exemplifies how important every little run saved is to a team. Now I'll explain the current approach that middle infielders take. So to start out, I wanted to determine which position actually covered most often on stolen base attempts. And as you can see here, each position covered 50% of the time, which is mind-blowing considering this is a sample size of 97 games over a span of 4 years. So this counted every single time a runner attempted to steal second base. It was perfectly split between shortstop and second baseman. After looking at who covered second baseman, I wanted to determine why did they cover. And so in order to test if they did this due to batter hitting tendency, I grouped the field into two zones. One on the left side, classifying batters as a left tendency hitter, and on the right side as a right tendency hitter. I wanted to see if positions tended to hit a certain way, if the shortstop or second baseman would cover. Looking at this data, well, first I'll start by explaining the theory behind checking the tendency. As you can see on the right side there, if you have a left-hitting tendency, it would make most sense for the second baseman to cover, given that the hole they would leave in the infield would be more likely that they would hit it towards, or would be least likely they would hit it towards, leaving it open, and where the shortstop would end up staying put, allowing for it to go their way most of the times, preventing a hit. And the opposite would be said about right-hitting tendency. And so as looking at the graph on the left, you can see that the second baseman ended up covering second base almost 80% of the time when there was a left-handed batter. And with shortstops, they covered about 70% of the time with the right tendency batter. And so although this isn't perfect 100% for both positions, you can see that infielders have a general understanding of determining which position should cover. Now that we've got the first infielder out of the way, we can now look at what does the second middle infielder do. So there are two options they can take. The first one is simple. They can stay put. They can stay in their spot while the other position goes to cover second base. Now the second option is backing up second base. As you can see here, the infielder leaves their spot and goes to attempt to back up second base. This would be in order to try to limit any preventative damage on a catcher making a bad throw to second base. So conventional wisdom's a funny thing. Analytics tries its best to counter biases and conventional wisdom. And so backing up second base is just one of those conventional wisdoms. It is universally accepted as a net positive approach to take. This is thought by it limits the damage that you would get if a catcher makes a bad throw to second. To prove its conventional wisdom, I'm sure many of you who have been in Little League or in college practice this quite frequently. And as we see in the league, it's still performed on a regular basis. However, this approach has still yet to be fully challenged or examined, which is what I want to do here. So here's an example of when backing up second base worked for the defense, just so you can get an idea. So in this example, Zach Davies is pitching to Steven Duggar. Catcher throws it to second base. It's a bad throw, but Hernan Perez is there to back up the throw. Easy throw to Mike Moustakas to get Kevin Pillar out at third base. Now that video was kind of fast and you couldn't see everything from a TV view, so I did this little graphic on the right. So the runner attempted to steal second base. After this, the shortstop decided to cover, and the second baseman decided to use option 2 and then back up second base on a bad throw. The runner reaches second base, but the catcher makes a bad throw to second base going into the outfield. So the runner advances or tries to advance to third. But due to the second baseman backing up the throw, they're able to make a routine throw to third base, getting the runner out. And so now you see how option 2 could benefit a team. And so here's an example of an offense taking advantage of the defense not using that approach and instead staying put. And so the video will not be working here, but just like the last example, I made a little graphic on the right so you can see what's happening. This example, Marcus Stroman, a pitcher, was actually the runner in this example. He was running to second base. The second baseman, Jazz Chisholm, in this example, went to second base to cover. The shortstop decided not to back up the throw and instead stay put. And due to a bad throw from Nick Fortes, the Marlins catcher, the ball went into the outfield where only the center fielder could have enough time to possibly get a throw into third. However, by the time the center fielder was able to get to the ball, Marcus Stroman, the runner, was already safely there at third base. Pretty routinely easy. So now that you see the two different approaches you can take when it comes to the second infielder, I wanted to look at both the runs that it would be allowing and that it would be saving by backing up second base. And so first, I'll start by explaining how many runs would be allowed by taking this approach. And so here are the two options the infielders can take. So if the shortstop decides to use option 1 and stay put, that's represented on the left, the batter only has a 15.77% chance of a hit. Whereas, if the shortstop decides to back up the throw, leaving their spot in the infield as now an open hole, the batter has a 59.21% increased likelihood of getting a hit if the shortstop decides to back up. The same process was then taken for the second baseman, and in this example, the increased likelihood was a bit higher, and it turned out to be 65.72% increase of a hit if the second baseman decided to use option 2 and back up the throw. Averaging these out perfectly evenly due to each position covering 50% of the time, we can see that there is a 62.47% increased likelihood of players getting on first and second base due to the batter getting a hit. Now, runs would only be allowed if the batter makes contact. If the batter does not make contact, the hole left by the second infielder wouldn't matter at all. So I wanted to see how often the ball was put into play. As you can see here, the ball was put into play 35.1% of the time. And so using that, along with this run expectancy, we can calculate how many runs would be allowed. And so here's a 2022 run expectancy matrix in order to try to get the run expectancy allowed. Now, this is the 2022 MLB run expectancy matrix, which would not be an exact calculation of using the data I had access to, given the data I had access to spanned across 4 years of the minor leagues, but this is still a great approximation of the amount of runs, and it's a good representation of the overall value. And so as you can see here on the matrix, players on first and second base give run expectancies of 1.435 with 0 outs, 0.902 with 1 out, and 0.44 with 2 outs. Now this would be the number of runs allowed if the batter ends up making contact, which is why, due to seeing that someone makes contact 35.1% of the times, here are the adjusted runs that would be allowed by the defense if the second infielder decided to back up the throw. Now that we determined how many runs they would be allowing, I wanted to check, well, how many runs would they end up be saving? And so runs would only be saved if the catcher makes a throw to second base, and henceforth it would only be saved if the catcher makes a bad throw to second base, in which a bad throw I determined was a ball that went past second base or past 128 feet. As you can see here, a catcher made a bad throw 24.8% of the time. Now here's the current outcome of infielders backing up. Out of the 29 times that the catcher made a bad throw, only 9 of those were an example of when the second infielder went to back up the throw. Of those 9 times, 5 of those were still able to reach third base, meaning backing up only limited the damage, did not fully prevent it. It is still a 44% decrease compared to option 1, where it would be 100% of the time they would advance to third base, but it isn't perfect. Using the run expectancy matrix again, we can determine that the runs expected with players on first and third base would be these respective values on your left. And now these would be the run expectancies for 55% of the time, where that would be the time when the runner is still able to advance to third base. And for the 44% of the other time, we would be using the same runs from the last slide. Given the catcher only makes a bad throw 24.79% of the time, the adjusted runs saved are displayed here. Now that we calculated both the runs allowed by the defense and the runs saved by the defense, we can combine it to see how many runs would the defense actually be saving. As you can see here, all of the values are negative, meaning that the defense would be allowing runs rather than saving. Even with 2 outs, it is almost 0. It is still in the negative, meaning that there would be no example of where backing up second base would actually result in positive runs expected. Given that it saves a negative amount of runs, we know that it's optimal for the second infielder to not back up second base. I wanted to thank you guys for listening, and I hope I was able to shed some light on some alternative views you might have had about some existing beliefs in baseball. And so I would love to welcome any questions. Thank you.
All right, we have time for some questions. I will just say my Little League coach lied to me all these years then, all those times. But turn around, raise your hands, and we'll pass the mic around. Any questions in the back?
We have a question in here.
All right, we'll take the question Steinberg, then we'll go to there.
How you doing? Good talk. Thanks very much. When you said at the very end that it was not optimal for the backup position, what would have to change for that to be to tip back the other way? Like, what are the biggest elements that you would see from a strategy perspective that might make it so that eventually would be better to back up second base?
Sure. So I think a lot of these teams might be a little hesitant on backing up second base. So to explain the process, the second infielder has to decide right when the runner starts running to second base whether they're going to back up or stay put. They don't get to wait to see if the batter makes contact. This allows for a little bit of hesitancy with the second infielder. And so that slight hesitancy might be enough to allow for the 5 out of 9 runners reaching third base that I alluded to earlier. I think if that value of instead of 5 out of 9 is able to get to 1 out of 9, 2 out of 9, we could see maybe closer to a 0, maybe would get slightly positive. I still don't see many ways that this could get fully positive, but I think trying to limit the damage once you decide to back up would be the most effective way to limit damage overall, if that makes sense.
We got time for the one question in the back here.
Yeah, so for this project, I don't think you looked at the position of the center fielder, and I was wondering do you think that could have any impact on the runs saved from not backing up because of the center fielder, like, essentially being the backup?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is something that the center fielder would have to play rather up. They would have to play decently close to the second base in order to make a throw to third. Obviously, that would then be allowing a greater chance of a hit to center field. That would kind of alter the outfielder communication and their talking. I think overall that maybe they could take a few steps forward, but it's still, you see in normal baseball, that's the approach taken now. If they don't back up, the center fielder runs to get the ball. And by that time, it's 100% certain that the runner will get to third base. So you would have to see an extreme movement of the center fielder forward in order to kind of counter that.
All right, let's go.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
All right, great job.